Hello there. Welcome back to the Garuda Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the previous episode. And I just would like to briefly thank all of the viewers and subscribers who have been supporting the channel so far by watching the podcast episodes so far. And I hope you continue to watch the upcoming episodes of the Garuda Podcast. And this next episode is even more special. I'm literally in awe of wonder with regards to the people who I've had a chance to interview and who have come on the podcast. My next guest here, in my opinion, is a little bit of a celebrity in the aviation community. He has had more than 40 years of flying experience. He has been an avid author, and he also has designed numerous ground school courses for pilots around the world. He also has a deep, critical, and analytical perspective within the field of aviation. My next guest here is Captain Ivan Luciani, who has been flying the Gulfstream G650 for Metrojet Limited, based in the Hong Kong SAR region. I hope you enjoyed the next episode in this series, and I hope you continue to support and watch episodes of the Garuda podcast. Let's begin.
So welcome, Captain Ivan, to the Garuda Podcast. I'm so happy you accepted my invitation and responded. Let's begin. And so we'll just begin just with a short introduction about you, and then we'll just be going through the questions and then just a closing remark. My guest here is Captain Ivan Luciani. So Captain Ivan is a Gulfstream G60 pilot for Metrojet Limited, and he currently stays in the Hong Kong SAR region. So before working as the chief captain, he was the manager of flight training at Metrojet Limited, and he's also an avid author and a student mentor. Captain Ivan was also the chief pilot at Global Aviation in Singapore, and then he was the director of flight operations in of Jet Asia in Macau. Captain Ivan has also written numerous books, and we'll briefly just be talking about one of them. And one of them is Journey Around the World, a G650's pilot's perspective, and the other one was An Aviator's Journey: Tales of a Corporate Pilot. And Captain Ivan has logged more than 12,000 hours of flying experience, and he has a bachelor's degree in aerospace science and a master's degree in aerospace safety and operations. And lastly, he also holds the CFI certificate from the FAA. So yeah, thank you, Captain Ivan, and let's begin.
Thank you
Um,
for having me, Evan.
yeah, yeah. And so my first question just for you is, why did you choose to become like a VIP pilot instead of like a traditional airline pilot? Like, what fascinated you about like this specific branch of aviation?
Well, for me, it all began early on in my aviation journey when I was working as a flight instructor in Denver, Colorado, and I found myself during a training flight in Aspen seeing a Learjet 35 land, and I was absolutely mesmerized by the size and by the look of this aircraft. The airplane landed, then it taxied, and it parked very near our Cessna 172, where I was standing with my student. And I was, as I said, completely mesmerized by the beauty of this aircraft. That was the first corporate jet that I had ever seen. I saw the two corporate pilots get out the plane, and they looked really sharp and professional. And I built up the courage to walk up to them and introduce myself. And they were very gracious with their time. They showed me the airplane, they answered questions. And one of them said to me, I've been exactly where you are today, meaning that they too had been flight instructors early on in their careers, building up flying time, and now they were flying corporate jets. And that's when I made the decision to become a corporate pilot. At the time, I was a student at Metropolitan State College uh, doing my undergraduate studies, and every one of my classmates was aiming to someday go to work for Delta, United, or American Airlines. And I was the only student in class who was actually thinking about going to work for a corporate company. And I did realize my dream of becoming a corporate pilot a few years later. After graduation, I pursued a career in corporate aviation, where my first job was flying King Air 200s. And over 40 years since then, I'm currently flying the Gulfstream 650. I've never looked back. It's been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, it must be for sure. Yeah, it's a beautiful aircraft.
Mhm.
And so I also got just a chance to read your LinkedIn profile, and in one of the components, it stated that you were like a course developer for like certain ground training courses. And it sounds like a very big responsibility, a very important responsibility. And what is like kind of the process towards like developing the curriculum for these courses, and like how do you know what to spend more time on or less time on? Or
Well, at the time, I was chief pilot for a particular company, and most of our training was conducted through third parties. For example, attending recurrent simulator training, we did that through Fly Safety International. But there were a number of courses that we wanted to teach in-house. And there was one course in particular that we thought was important for us to develop and teach in-house. And that course was a subject that I was very passionate about: crew resource management. The application of management principles and interpersonal relationship skills in the flight operations environment in order to optimize the effective use of all available resources, basically avoiding, eliminating, or mitigating the consequences of human error. A very, very important subject. So, having that passion for the subject matter, having developed the skills to present the course, it was fairly easy to put the course together, to put the course material together, and control the quality of the message. So rather than contracting another company to provide us a generic course, we developed one that was specifically tailored to our own operations. That was very exciting. I must admit that I enjoyed that a great deal. And there were other courses: advanced automation, fatigue management, et cetera, et cetera.
okay, yeah. Yeah, like I think ground training is certainly it's a very important process of training. So
Mhm.
and yeah, and so you're right now like a corporate pilot. So what is the like process and training needed to become like a corporate pilot, and like how does it differ from like a traditional airline pilot training?
Well, the objective is the same, obviously, to provide the pilot with the tools, the skills, the knowledge necessary to perform their jobs. But the manner in which it is provided is vastly different from that of the airlines. An airline that employs hundreds of pilots and operates hundreds of airplanes must have its own internal training department where they basically have the ground schools, the simulators, and the instructors to provide the training. And that is how they're able to achieve economics of scale and achieve a greater level of efficiency, as well as effectiveness in ensuring that any training that is required by the regulator is provided correctly and on timely. And they also get to control the quality of the training because they get to mold their crews into their operating culture, so to speak. For a corporate pilot, it's very different because you may work for a company that has a single airplane, and they may be three pilots, one mechanic, possibly one flight attendant. And so you cannot afford to operate your own simulators. That would be highly challenging for any company to do
Yeah.
due to the cost involved. So it's a lot easier for us to subcontract our training to one of the two primary training providers. These training providers are Flight Safety International and CAE. These companies have training centers all over the world. So when it comes to simulator training, we attend current training or initial training, as the case may be, at one of these training providers at one of their facilities. In our case, the closest one to us happens to be in Singapore. There is another one in Dubai, Long Beach, California, Savannah, Farnborough in London, and so on. So what you do is you provide them your standard operating procedures. You provide them your own company requirements in terms of training scenarios, and they ensure that any regulatory body requirements are also provided. So if you're training under the FAA, they make sure that everything that is required by the FAA is included in the training, as well as anything that is required by your own company is also provided as well. So we attend training every 6 months, and in some cases, companies can attend training once every 12 months. It all depends on the company. The minimum required is once every 12 months. You go back for recurrent training. The training basically consists of 2 days of ground school in which you review all the aircraft systems and limitations and procedures, and that is followed by 2 or 3 days of simulator sessions. So again, vastly different, but with the same objective: to provide the crews with the knowledge, the skills, the tools necessary for them to perform their jobs and satisfy not just their regulatory requirements, but also their own company internal requirements.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think CAE also has a training center in Toronto, I think nearby somewhere.
I
Yeah,
believe they do, yes. And they also have one in
yeah,
Montreal.
yeah, yeah. And so I briefly spoke about how you were like how you're also an author, and like every author tries to communicate like a specific message. So like what made you also like why did you choose to become an author, and is there any specific message you're trying to convey through your books?
Yes, I didn't actually intend to become an author. It almost happened by accident. There were some circumstances that occurred at a particular time in my life that prompted me to sit down and start writing. But the message that I want to convey to my readers is that pursue and achieve your own dreams, just like I was able to pursue and achieve my own dreams. So basically, I want to motivate and inspire the next generation of aviators. Uh, that is the main message of the first book. The second book is a little bit more technical. It's about the operation of an advanced business jet on trips around the world. Uh, and the message in that particular book is to highlight the level of professionalism that is required to operate one of these aircraft.
Yeah. Yeah, I also I got a chance to look at your course notes, I think, that you had written on your iPad for
Mhm.
your for the G650. Yeah, those were quite detailed. And yeah. And so I also read that so you've flown like a lot of corporate aircraft, not just the G650. And is there like an aircraft you prefer to fly, or is there like based on all the aircraft you've flown before, or?
Well, today I fly a Gulfstream G650, which is Gulfstream's top of the line aircraft. And I love flying it every minute of it. But just like every other pilot, there is always one airplane that is has a special meaning. And in my case, that aircraft remains the Learjet 35. And I'm gonna tell you why. First, it was the airplane that led me to pursue a career in corporate aviation when I saw that airplane for the first time in Aspen, Colorado, early on in my career. A career in which I was just starting out, and I was excited for the future, and I was working hard to build up experience and gain more knowledge, and eventually get into one of these jets. Second of all, it was also the aircraft in which I received my command. So a few years later, after graduating from the university, uh, I was given the opportunity to upgrade to captain, and that happened to be in a Learjet 35. A very, very special moment for me as well. Thirdly, it is the airplane that I flew in Southeast Asia on some of the most challenging but highly satisfying missions that I've ever did. I was based in Singapore at the time, and I was flying primarily air ambulance missions in a Learjet 35 and also a Learjet 36. Um, these were very challenging trips because you are at home, you get a call, Captain, we have a trip leaving in 2 hours, going to XYZ. And you're basically departing and flying to remote airports throughout Southeast Asia, around Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, you name it, I've been there. In the middle of the night to go fetch a patient and fly him back to Singapore where he could get medical treatment. So it was
Yeah.
also very satisfying flying. And all of that happened in an airplane that led me to pursue a career in corporate aviation, um, allowed me to be upgraded to captain, and help people that were in need of medical care. I flew the airplane for about 10 years and I accumulated about 3,000 hours. And I love every minute of it. And today, even though I fly one of the most advanced business jets there are, whenever I see a Learjet pass by, I stop and gaze in awe at how beautiful that airplane is. It's a pilot's airplane. It's a very challenging and demanding aircraft. It's a kind of aircraft that is very unforgiving. It's an aircraft that you have to fly it and fly it well, or it can fly you straight into the ground. So very demanding. And I credit the Learjet for giving me the flying skills that I enjoy today as a Gulfstream pilot, where
Yeah.
now everything is fully automated.
So, like, just about that, you being an ambulance pilot, so you don't really have much time to like prepare for that mission. So, it is it more it obviously is more difficult, but like, how much time do you have to plan like a mission? Maybe like 30 minutes or,
Well,
uh,
it's a very challenging mission, but it all begins with the dispatcher on duty receiving the call and start working on obtaining all the overflight permits. Usually, because it's an air ambulance mission, he can secure the permits verbally over the phone and making all the arrangements, notifying the engineer, the mechanic, and then notifying us, the flight crew, basically 2 hours before departure, asking me what time do you want to be picked up at home. So they will send a vehicle to my house, pick me up, and the idea is to arrive at the airport 1 hour before departure. When I got to the airport, the mechanic had already pulled the airplane out of the hangar, was doing his own pre-flight inspection, and also I could see my co-pilot already there, getting the airplane ready, refueling it, and then I would just go straight into the office to receive a briefing from the dispatcher and be provided with all the documents and all the information that I needed to perform the mission, as well as I was sitting in front of the computer to prepare the flight plan. So everything happened in a synchronized manner. Everybody had a job to perform, and everything came together with us taking off on time and climbing in the middle of the night as fast as we could so that we could get the medical team that we had on board to that airport where an ambulance will be waiting to drive the medical team to the hospital for them to retrieve the patient and bring him back. So it was very challenging because we were flying to unfamiliar destinations in the middle of the night in areas with high terrain in all quadrants, with non-precision instrument approach procedures in a non-radar environment with air traffic controllers who didn't speak very good English. It was very, very challenging. There is no doubt about it. And the airplane was equipped with the bare minimum that was required. We didn't have fancy automation. It was just what was legally required in terms of communication, navigation, and surveillance. So you really had to be on your toes. You really had to know what you were doing. And of course, we had a great team where everybody knew what to do, and we all came together and made it happen. And I gotta tell you, yes, it was very challenging, but it was also very rewarding because when we got back to Singapore on time, that patient was gonna receive good medical care and was gonna be okay. And you had a role to play in that happening. So it was very, very gratifying to do.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. It sounds like a very rewarding job for sure.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah. And so like in your book, you were talking briefly about you had a member of the royal family on board. Like yeah, how was that interaction? Must have been exciting.
Yes, it was. It was very interesting. I flew a couple of trips with a particular member of the European royal family, and that trip involved going to multiple cities in multiple countries over a period of time. And before the trip, we were provided with the protocol. This is what you can expect, and this is how you will interact with Your Highness. But this particular member of the royal family had been a helicopter pilot for the Navy in his own country. So, being an aviator, he was obviously interested in our aircraft and talking to us. So, he got to spend most of his time in the jump seat with us up front in the cockpit, talking about aviation, talking about the geography of the places that we were going to, and so on. At one point, I had to tell him, Your Highness, we're about to commence our descent. I need you to please go back to your seat and fasten your seatbelt. And he did so. And of course, after landing, we opened the door. There is a red carpet. There is the honor guard waiting for him, and there is the head of state waiting to greet him. So at that point, everything went back to being fully formal. But as far as our interaction with him was great because it was another aviator who was passionate about aviation. And at that point, yes, the same level of respect that you have with everyone uh, was still there. But the subject of discussion was one that we all felt very passionate about, and that is aviation. So it was wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I think even Prince Harry was a helicopter pilot, I think. Yeah. And so so you've been flying for like a very, very long time and like the industry has faced a lot of changes. What has been like one change you have kind of welcomed and one change you don't like or you dislike now?
Okay. Well, I began my journey as an aviator before crew resource management, CRM, became an integral part of how companies operate in the interest of avoiding, eliminating, or mitigating the consequences of human error. So, crew resource management, CRM, uh, had already been implemented by some of the airlines at the time, but it had not really caught up to corporate aviation until a few years later. I became very, very passionate about CRM. One of the reasons why I wanted to develop that course and teach it myself and tailor it to our own specific operations. So I welcome that change. And today, CRM is basically a core operating philosophy for how most companies operate. It is the way to go. So that's one positive change that I've seen happen in corporate aviation during my journey. During that same journey, I have seen how technology has advanced, how airplanes have become technological marvels with highly integrated and fully automated systems, where pilots have become system managers, basically, where their
Yeah.
job is basically to program the computer to do what they wanted it to do. And as a result, that has gone at the expense of flying skills. So when you become over reliant on automation, and all you do is, as soon as you are airborne, following a takeoff is engaged autopilot, and that autopilot remains engaged until shortly before landing, and in some cases, it will do the landing for you. Then the amount of time that you have to actually do this and develop and maintain your flying skills is greatly reduced. We have airplanes with not just the autopilot, but auto throttles, auto brakes, auto landing. Everything is fully automated these days, and that's okay. I have nothing against technology. In fact, I love technology, and I try to master it and use it as it is intended. But we have to recognize that that is also coming at the expense of being able to develop your flying skills. Now, I began my journey at a time when airplanes were not that automated, and you had to develop your flying skills. The Learjet was a
Yeah.
great aircraft to do that. I had to
Yeah.
develop my flying skills, and I had to fly that airplane and fly it well. The airplane demanded that I fly that airplane well. And if I didn't do so, it would scare me because
Yeah. Yeah.
it was very unforgiving to those who did not put in the time and the effort to understand it and master it as you were flying it. But the newer generations of aviators have grown in a different era where automation is the norm. Automation achieves a greater level of efficiency. It allows pilots to uh, keep an eye on the big picture, but at the same time, it has come at the expense of, as I said, flying skills. So that has been one change that I think has been somewhat negative. So for the newer generation, my advice to them when it comes to automation is that yes, you need to understand and master the automation, but also take the time to take every opportunity that you can to develop your flying skills by actually doing what pilots were taught to do early on in their journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so as we said earlier, so you're a corporate pilot, and corporate jets like the Gulfstream, are known to be flying at much higher altitudes compared to passenger jets. Like I think most private jets fly at typically at 45,000 feet. So, could you just kind of briefly talk about like why do private jets fly at such a high altitude? Is it just for like passenger comfort? Is it just for like the performance of the aircraft? Like what's the need to fly at such a high altitude?
Well, we operate the airplane at altitudes and speeds where it is most efficient.
Yeah,
And the altitude or the cruise level that we select varies on a number of factors. Um, but ultimately, we want to operate the airplane at the altitude in which it is most efficient in terms of speed and fuel consumption, both of which optimize the range of the aircraft. Now, the newer generation of airliners like the 787, the Airbus 350, they have the performance capability to fly at much higher altitudes. So that's the altitude that provides them with the greatest efficiency in terms of speed and fuel consumption. We are no different. The business jets operates between 39,000 feet and 47,000 feet. The final altitude depends on a number of factors. If I'm flying from Hong Kong, my home base, to London, our initial cruise altitude will be about flight level 400. And as we burn fuel and become lighter, we are able to step climb to 43,000 feet. And downrange, as we continue to become lighter, we're able to step climb to 47,000 feet. So basically, these are the altitudes that are providing the greatest true airspeed and the lowest fuel consumption. So what altitude you fly to will depend on the aircraft weight. Yes, the airplane has a service ceiling of 51,000 feet, but does that mean that we're going to climb to 51,000 feet? No, that will not be possible in some cases if you are too heavy, or desirable if you're not going that far. So it
Yeah.
all depends. So we do fly at altitudes in which the airplane is the most efficient. And it just so happens that those altitudes also provide a greater level of comfort for the passengers because we're flying at altitudes that are above most of the weather. Therefore, we can avoid turbulence. And those are the altitudes that keep us above most of the air traffic, which means that we have the opportunity of flying more direct courses as opposed to having to fly at similar levels with the airlines in which we had to basically be behind them, maintaining a certain distance as per air traffic control.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so just like as a follow-up question, how important is it to be aware of hypoxia? Because like you're flying at such a high altitude. I think in one of your Instagram posts as well, you were like briefly talking about hypoxia. And like could you briefly talk about like what it is, like how dangerous it is, and like what's the training that you have to undergo to be prepared for hypoxia related emergencies?
Okay, well, first of all, hypoxia is basically a condition in which there is a low level of oxygen in your body, basically, and that means that there is less oxygen reaching your brain. Not a desirable condition at all. Airplanes are designed to fly at very high altitudes where they are the most efficient, but we human beings cannot survive at those altitudes. So airplanes need to be pressurized, and that allows us to survive in an environment where outside of the airplane it will be impossible to survive. So we do need to understand and be prepared for the possibility of a loss of that pressurization system.
Yeah.
And we're taught about what hypoxia is. We're taught about a term called time of useful consciousness. And that is basically the length of time an individual can perform effectively in an environment that is deprived of oxygen. And at the altitudes that we operate, 45,000 feet, for example, the time of useful consciousness, TUC, it's just a few seconds, anywhere between 5 to 9 seconds. That's how long a person has to be able to respond to the situation. That is why it's so important, and we're trained to promptly don our oxygen mask and to commence an emergency descent right away so that we can descend to an altitude where supplemental oxygen is no longer needed. The training that we do in the simulators involve emergencies where we have a rapid decompression, where we have to, as I said, don our oxygen mask and commence an emergency descent. We also attend altitude chambers where we get to experience the effects of hypoxia. And this training is fascinating because it's all done in a controlled environment, in a hyperbaric chamber called altitude chambers, where they basically raise the cabin altitude within this chamber to 18,000 feet. And everybody is on oxygen. Everything is okay because we're breathing oxygen through an oxygen system. But then they ask your team member to go ahead and remove his oxygen mask. And gradually, you can see how hypoxia begins to impair his ability to follow basic commands.
Yeah.
You start asking them basic questions, or you start asking them to do some math on paper. And you can see the changes in his demeanor as the onset of hypoxia kicks in. So it allows you, when you are on oxygen and doing perfectly well, to see firsthand the effects of hypoxia on the person sitting next to you. Of course,
Yeah.
he's then going to have the same opportunity to do with you. He's going to be on oxygen, you will not, and you'll be able to start feeling the onset of hypoxia. In my case, I had a tingling sensation in the tips of my fingers. Uh, my lips became a little numb. I started to feel a little lightheaded. So you get to identify your own individual symptoms of hypoxia. And of course, if that were to continue, then it could potentially lead to death. There's no doubt about it. Of course, being done in a training environment, in a controlled environment, we're able to do so safely so that we can get a first-hand indication of what to expect. When we see the person next to us acting a little strange, it could be an indication that, hey, it seems a little hypoxic. That basically means that I will be affected as well. Therefore, I'm going to don my oxygen mask and make sure that there is no issue with the pressurization system. And if there is, we're going to commence an emergency descent right away. Now, the Gulfstream G650, as well as previous Gulfstream models, has a system that works in the background that assumes that both pilots will be incapacitated due to the effects of hypoxia, and it will automatically commence an emergency descent.
Yeah.
So, yes, we're flying at 45,000 feet. We know that we only have a few seconds of time of useful consciousness in which we have to promptly don our oxygen mask and commence an emergency descent. But if for some reason we fail to do so and both pilots pass out, the airplane will commence an emergency descent and will also send out a distress signal. So ATC, air traffic control, is aware of what is happening.
Okay. Yeah. 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 That's a very cool feature. Yeah. And and so a different question I just had was like, what kind of applications do you use to like prepare a flight plan? Like I've seen pilots all the time like use an iPad with certain applications loaded on it, and so like what kind of information does it give you, and like how do you come up with a flight plan?
Well, the iPad has been a blessing for us because it has
Mm,
allowed us to basically go paperless and have
mm,
access to very relevant and important up to date information. When it comes to a flight plan, the flight plan is not always prepared by the flight crew. It is primarily prepared by the dispatch team or dispatchers. And it is done in coordination with the flight crew. The flight crew will basically provide the flight plan specs, saying, okay, I want to depart with this much fuel. These are the cruise levels that I want to fly at. These are the speeds that I want to fly at. So the flight crew has a direct involvement in the planning, preparation, and of course, the conduct of the flight. But we don't actually do the flight planning ourselves. That is done by a dispatcher. So we have access to all of that information via a number of apps. In my iPad, my primary app is from Gulfstream, and it's called Plane Book. And in that app, I have access to every Gulfstream manual that I need to have access to, from the airplane flight manual to the operating manual to the performance handbook to the cold weather operations manual, etc., etc., etc. So I have access to up-to-date information on my iPad, something that in the past I would have to rely on manuals that were stored in the airplane. So I could only access those manuals when I was at the aircraft. And accessing information was very time consuming. Now I can be anywhere and I have access to everything through the
Yeah.
iPad. As far as our flight planning, the primary app that we use is called AirLink Direct. This app allows me to see the operational flight plan. It allows me to compute a weight and balance calculation. It allows me to compute takeoff and landing calculation. It allows me to access weather information for the airport that we're flying to, or from the airport that we're departing from, to the alternate airport. So we have the METAR, the terminal weather information, as well as the forecast information. I also have en route weather information. We have access to NOTAMs. So if, for example, a runway is closed between a certain dates and certain times, I know if it is something that will affect us on arrival at that airport. We also have access to runway analysis data. We have access to uh, aircraft documents. That single app provides us with 99% of the information that we need. It's a fantastic app, and I don't have to rely on multiple apps to access information. Everything is right there. The other app that we use is ForFlight. This is an app that is becoming more and more popular, but we use it primarily to access terminal, arrival, and departure charts. Basically, your Jepson charts. So everything from the airport diagram to your standard instrument departures to your instrument approach procedures to your standard terminal arrival route procedures. So everything that you need to navigate from point A to point B is there. So those two apps, AirLink Direct, for flight, primarily for operating the airplane from A to B, and Gulfstream's plane book to access aircraft related and specific information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, there are a
Yeah.
few
The
other apps
yeah.
out there. I have one additional app for cold weather operations that allows me to determine my holdover timetables. So if I am de-icing and anti-icing the aircraft, it allows me to know how long that anti-icing fluid is effective, uh, so that I can depart within that time and be protected from ice accumulation. And there are multiple apps out there. Like I said, the arrival of the iPad has been a complete blessing because it allows us to have access to information that in the past will be very difficult to access at a single source.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the yeah. It's pilots very prominently use it. So I
Mhm.
have and so we were talking about like your LinkedIn page before, and some of the posts you have made on your LinkedIn page are also quite interesting. And it just kind of seems like you have a very deep and analytical perspective on aviation. And one of the posts I was really interested in was like the negative effects of social media on aviation. And there was a
Mhm.
picture of like the single pilot jumping out of a 172. And I'm not sure what must have happened to the aircraft afterwards, if it crashed or if it was just flying unattended. So, like, people want attention, people want likes, people want to become like internet celebrities. Could you talk about this issue? Like, why do you think it can be, or how can social media be detrimental to the aviation community?
Well, the particular case that you're citing is one individual that installed a number of GoPro cameras around the airplane, both inside and out, and then he claimed to have had an issue with the airplane. And it just so happens that he was wearing a parachute. So he basically jumped out of his airplane and deployed his parachute and recorded the whole thing and then posted it on his social media platforms. This individual, needless to say, lost his pilot's license because he's advertising a reckless issue, reckless behavior. So the regulator had access to the evidence that they needed to justify revoking his pilot's license. And he was driven primarily to pursue likes and followers. Social media is here to stay. It is basically a part of how we interact with one another, how we get information, how we entertain ourselves. But it can also be used properly. I use Instagram and I use LinkedIn as platforms from which to inspire and motivate the next generation of aviators. I also use it to inform and educate aviation enthusiasts who are interested in knowing what it is that we do and how we do it. I also use it to rekindle the flame of my colleagues in aviation who are already pilots, but who may have lost a little bit the passion for what we do. So if you're using social media in a positive way, it is great. Unfortunately, the algorithm of social media is such that it can be addicting to some people who use it primarily to gather likes and to have a large number of followers. And if among those people there are some who use social media to display reckless behavior, and in particular flying in a reckless manner, then it can cause a great deal of damage to aviation as a whole. Because those who don't know much about aviation may think that that's what pilots do. Pilots behave in a certain way. Well, that's not the case at all. Pilots are passionate about what they do. Pilots take great pride in what they do, how they do it. We go to work trying to be the best that we possibly can at what we do, at what we love. We don't see it as a job. We see it as a calling. That's my passion. I just happen to get paid to do it, but we don't see it as a job. So that's the image, that's the reputation that we want to foster. When you have people come in, small group of pilots who engage in reckless behavior just to attract attention, that can do a lot of damage to the rest of us.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that article was to inform and to encourage people who watch those videos to, rather than leaving a comment saying, wow, that pilot is so brave for doing that, do the opposite. Let's discourage these
Yeah.
people from doing what they're doing, which is greatly harmful to the aviation industry that we have worked so hard to build.
Yeah. Yeah. And so about that though, like just like as another follow-up question. So like recently on the news, like a lot of incidents of turbulence are being reported. Like and the media has kind of reported like climate change has increased the number of turbulence related issues. And I think Matthew McConaughey was on board one of the flights, the Lufthansa flight, which had severe turbulence. So, is there like a genuine concern about turbulence? Like the number of incidents are increasing, or is it just like being over sensationalized by the media?
Well, climate change is an important and relevant issue that deserves attention, but it's also a very controversial issue. So
Yeah.
I try to avoid seeking answers from the media, especially using TV experts and sensationalizing a celebrity's experience. So, no, I will not give it too much credence when it comes from social media and interviewing TV experts and using a celebrity status to highlight an issue that they may feel one way or the other. Turbulence is real, it happens. We do the best that we can to identify the areas where we can potentially experience turbulence, and we do the best that we can to avoid it or to at least minimize it to the maximum extent possible. But as far as trying to pin it on climate change, I will have to refer to more reliable sources of information, such as the Flight Safety Foundation, or perhaps the FAA, or the NTSB, or some other more credible source.
Then, so so kind of moving on. So like I said before, like you've been flying for a long time, and what are some misconceptions which you think people still have about like being a pilot, aviation, or just in general, like people still are tend to misconceive about aviation? Like,
Well, nowadays, with the advent of social media, we have access to good information. Yes, we spoke about that negative side of social media, but that happens to be a minority. If you want to get good information, you can find it. Uh, Proof of that is one of the things that I do. Try to inform and educate those who are not in aviation but like it enough to want to know more about it. Some of the common misconceptions are that pilots need to have perfect eye vision. And while that may have been the case many years ago, especially in the military, it is not the case today. I mean, proof of that is you see me wearing corrective glasses. So as long as you can get corrected glasses to 2020, you're able to be a pilot. And if your eye vision deteriorates, as long as you're able to correct it to an acceptable level, you're able to renew and maintain your aviation medical certificate. So that's one misconception that I still believe it's still around.
okay.
Um, there are other misconceptions out there. One of them may be that pilots need to be uh, very brave and adventurous and the like. And the fact is that we try to identify and avoid risk to the maximum extent possible. We no longer fly out into the world, into the unknown. If I haven't flown to a particular city, a particular airport, we devote a great deal of time in planning and preparation to ensure that there are no surprises. So, unlike early on in aviation, where pilots had to be uh, adventurous and be willing to go into the unknown, we no longer do that anymore. So, those are two of the most common misconceptions that may still be around. There are others, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like, one last question just about aviation in general is many new aircraft are being developed, and hopefully within the next year or two, we should hopefully see the launch of some of them. So the most exciting aircraft being developed, at least for me, like what I'm most excited about is the 777X. Hopefully, experienced a lot of delays, but hopefully it comes out soon.
Mhm.
What are you most excited about? Uh, like, what are you most excited about? Like about what's to come?
Well, the 777X will certainly be a fantastic new design. In my case, I am more oriented towards corporate aviation, and the Gulfstream 650, even though it is currently Gulfstream's flagship aircraft in terms of size, in terms of range, in terms of speed, It is the last Gulfstream model with the traditional Honeywell avionics system, composed of multiple screens and switches and knobs coloring the cockpit. Starting with the Gulfstream 500, every new Gulfstream model has now come with a Honeywell symmetry flight deck avionics system, which is completely revolutionary because it is comprised of touchscreen controllers. So instead of having knobs and switches that perform only one function, now you're equipped with a multitude of screens that can be anything and everything at any time. That is the future. The Gulfstream G650 is the first Gulfstream model with a fly-by-wire flight control system, but it is also the last Gulfstream model with a traditional control column. Going forward, every new Gulfstream model comes with what they call active control side sticks. And these are not just the traditional passive side sticks that you find in a lot of airliners. These are active control side sticks that basically allow each pilot to know what the other pilot is doing because the side sticks move in unison. So if they are moved by one pilot or by the other pilot, the other pilot can see exactly what is happening. And that feedback is important. So when you ask me what am I most excited about in aviation, is the arrival of this new interface between the pilots and their aircraft in the form of active control side sticks and touchscreen technology.
Okay. Yeah, that system is quite complex. It is very very futuristic. Yeah, and so like I just had a few questions about like the G650. So like one of the most striking features, and like many airliners have it now, is like the hood, the heads up display.
Mhm.
What kind of information does it give you? Like what does the HUD give you?
Well, the heads-up display is an additional tool that is available to us to operate the airplane. I am a big user of the HUD. As the name implies, it is a display that allows the pilot to maintain their heads up as they are operating the aircraft because it provides you with basically all of the flight information that you will get or that you get through your flight instruments. So rather than looking down at the flight instruments to see my airspeed, my altitude, my heading, my course deviation indication, my vertical speed, I have access to all that information through the heads-up display, which is nothing more than a glass that is in front of me with that symbology. So I can be looking out the airplane, looking for the airport as we get ready to land, and I still have access to the information that I need to land the airplane safely. Now, the Gulfstream has an additional tool that is available to us that works in combination with the head-up display, and that is the SDS, which is a system that uses an infrared camera that allows us to basically see things that we wouldn't be able to see with the naked eye. So, if, for example, you're shooting an approach in pitch dark conditions, the EVS system, the Enhanced Vision System, that's what it's called, allows us to basically see in complete darkness. And it also allows us to see through fog. So if we are executing an approach at night, in a pitch dark night, we can actually see the terrain that surrounds the airport. We can see the runway. We can see anything basically that generates heat. The forward-looking infrared camera basically senses changes in temperature, and everything around the airport generates temperature. It is designed primarily for us to detect the approach lights as we're coming in for landing because those lights generate heat unless the lighting system is composed of LED lights, which in which case they do not generate heat. But basically, the lights and everything on the airport, from the runway to the grass to the ground, generates heat, and all of that is displayed to us in the HUD. So I have access to flight information as well as access to what's actually in front of me that I wouldn't be able to see with the naked eye.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a very useful system for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so just like one other question about the G650. So uh, how does it perform under the ILS system? Like I really like talking about the ILS system, and could you just maybe talk about how you configure the aircraft to perform an ILS landing, and like what are the components involved for this type of a
Okay. Well, first of
mm,
all, the ILS
mm,
has been in use for decades. It is a very reliable and very accurate precision approach system that provides us with horizontal guidance as well as vertical guidance. And the idea is to allow us to descend to an altitude that is about 200 feet above the touchdown zone and half a mile from the runway, at which point the pilot has to have the runway environment in sight and continue the rest of the approach and landing visually. For the ILS, uh, we obviously want to be fully configured in terms of flaps, gear, speed, completion of checklists by 1,000 feet over the ground. So we start configuring as we get closer. I start extending flaps, usually at 2,500 feet. That's when we extend the landing gear. And at about 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet, that's when we extend the last set of flaps. The whole idea is to be, as I said, fully configured by the time you get to 1,000 feet. In our case, we're only CAD 1 approved, which basically means that we can descend to 200 feet on average, at which point we have to be visual with the runway environment in order to continue the landing. If at that point we are not visual with the runway environment, then we have to execute a misapproach. So the ILS is a great system. It's a very reliable system. It's a very accurate system, but it's also a very old system. And eventually it's going to be replaced with GPS-based instrument approach procedures.
yeah, yeah. And so my final question for you is just and we briefly talked about this before, but like what kind of advice would you want to give with people who are like watching this podcast, like who want to consider a career in aviation?
Well, I encourage them. If that is their passion, if that's what they want to do, I encourage them to pursue and achieve that dream. Many of us pursue and achieve our dreams. We made it, and so can they. As far as what advice I would give them is to accept the fact that learning never stops.
Yeah,
You obtain your license, you become a pilot, but your learning continues until the day after you retire. I've been in
yeah,
aviation for over 4 decades, and I still devote 1 or 2 hours of study a day. And I do that to either learn new information or to reinforce information that I already know, or to relearn something that I may have forgotten.
yeah,
So it requires constant study, constant improvement. In summary, learning never stops.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, Captain Ivan, I would really like to thank you for coming on the podcast, and I'll just link your YouTube, sorry, not YouTube, your Instagram page and your LinkedIn page in the description, and I'll also link your book also in the description. It's definitely a great read. And yeah, thank you so much for waking up early and giving me your time. And yeah, I hope to stay in touch. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been a real pleasure, Ahmed. Good luck with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you.